Ladies and gentlemen, three comparatives that I'm going to do in my speech. First, if the coup succeeds, there is more likelihood for people to get more rights and more democracy within Turkey itself. Secondly, instability and why it's likely to be greater when the coup fails. Thirdly, about international relations with Turkey and why they're likely to be significantly more stable. Before that, what exactly are we talking about? We think the likely scenario when the coup succeeds contains the following elements. First, we believe that the army as a whole front will unite behind us, even though it was initially stuck by a single faction within the army, simply because most of the army wanted to take part but were afraid of this losing. Therefore, we think that the army perceives itself as a defender of democracy, and we believe the generals, when they see an opportunity to take more power, are likely to capitalize upon that. Second, we believe that in order for this to succeed, there has to be some degree of international support for that new regime. We say that support will either be given on the initial phase or after the coup has already succeeded to an extent, because the West also needs Turkey on their side, whether it's for the refugee agreement, whether it's for things like the fight against IS, and all sorts of other things happening in that region. In fact, it's a member of NATO. We don't believe that that they're being ostracized is a likely scenario. Third, we believe that the likely scenario is that the army, as it promised, will move towards a transition to democracy, like it has done 4 times in the past 50 years. We think that they're likely to suspend elections for, let's say, 2 or 3 years until they build up the infrastructure, draft a new constitution, and then reach another election. We also think that it's critical to note here that we're not comparing this to the status quo in Turkey. We're comparing this to the status quo in Turkey after the coup has failed, which means much more aggressive action by the Turkish regime in order to sustain itself, which we're going to be analyzing in our speech. But it's not okay for opposition to be telling us, but you see, Turkey today is more moderate or things of that sort, because we believe there is a counterfactual on both sides of the house. Let's start with rights and why we're likely to get more of them. Because we say that the Erdogan administration already today is becoming less and less democratic. We're talking about things like taking rights, taking more and more authorities to the presidential branch. We're talking about things like limiting the media and opposition parties. We're saying when that happens, and when they have a captive audience that can't get other information about what they're electing, mostly concentrated in villages where they're exposed to propaganda from the Erdogan regime, we're not actually getting true democracy, and they don't have an interest in representing large sections of the Turkish public. Therefore, we're saying in terms of the army, we believe, first of all, that the army does have an interest in actually establishing democracy within Turkey. Why? First, we say that the army has done this several times in the past. We're saying this is what these people in the army in Turkey, unlike other places, the army has been trained for this. This is part of what officers, the ethos of the army. Is the clarification? No, don't go. So it's part of the ethos of the army. They've been trained for this. They have operational plans to do exactly that. Second of all, we're saying just the fact that they've done this in the past is a good indication that this is likely to be a scenario. Second, we're saying that they have an obligation that they made towards the Turkish people, that the Turkish people will be willing to accept a military rule for a long period of time if they don't follow up on that claim. What does that mean? It means people can have massive strikes. It means people can have massive demonstrations. For all these reasons, we just don't think it's likely that the army will be able to keep a dictatorship. Thirdly, we're saying that the army will be more dependent than Erdogan himself on international support. Why? Firstly, their arms come mostly from the West. Secondly, because they have more of an ethos of needing the West, especially when they don't have the population to rely on as a foundation for their rule. So again, international pressure for democracy is likely to be significantly more effective than it is with Erdogan. But let's take the hard case here, the worst case scenario in which the army actually takes power completely, and show why this is still a situation in which people get more rights than under Erdogan. Because first, note that under a situation where a coup has happened, Erdogan is likely to take much more powers and to be able to justify taking much more powers in an emergency situation. Second, note that when Erdogan is Islamizing Turkey, which he's been doing for quite a while, in terms of the constitution, in terms of courts, this means inherently that women, for example, are excluded and don't get the same rights under these courts because when he's implementing things that are closer to Sharia law. Secondly, because of the ousting of religious minorities and ethnic minorities, like we said with PKK, we don't think the army has the same set of incentives there, because we believe the army specifically has an interest as an interest to build upon more massive, broader public support, it doesn't have a reason to exclude those people. Thirdly, the army, as we said, is more influenced by international pressure, which also translates even within a dictatorship. They're just likely to give more rights to individuals. For all these reasons, we say we get more rights and more democracy under our side of the house. Before I go on, closing has any questions? No?
You asked us to accept the realistic comparative, but you need to offer us the same politeness. It's not realistic to say that just by taking power, all units of the army will be unified behind the coup, given the huge amount of conditioning the AKP has given it over the last 15 years of their rule.
Thank you. Great. Let's talk about instability and compare the two worlds. We're saying that the likely scenario is for the coup to be ended quickly. Why is that the case? First of all, within the army itself, we're saying that, yes, the reason Erdogan has been trying to purge the military for quite a while is most of the generals and the high-ranking officers are still more loyal to the secular regime and constitution of Turkey. Secondly, we're saying that even if this is not the case, as soon as the coup, as we say, the coup has succeeded, that means that even people who have been supportive of Erdogan are just less likely to have the incentive to keep on doing that. They have more to lose and to risk by taking arms against the regime. Note the comparative, however, is that if the coup fails, there is still likely to be armed insurrection continuing. Why? Because we have people with a lot of weapons who are still fighting against, who feel threatened and feel that they could end up in jail or dead. Therefore, they're more likely to still use those guns against the government. Note also that the AKP specifically is likely we're likely to be able to mention them quite fast because most of their power centers are not in Istanbul and Ankara, but in the villages. This is where the more mass popular support lies. The mass popular support in cities is more for the secular parts, meaning there's more of an ability for the army to take the center of power. If they want to tell us that some parts of the army will go against that coup, then they also have to take into account that the public within the cities is more likely to side with the factions who are against Erdogan, and therefore making it significantly harder for their side to win. Moreover, we're saying that in the backlash will be felt by religious people is also matched today by the backlash felt by secular people who are living in Turkey by the tens of thousands because they feel that their rights are not respected, their country is lost its way. For all these reasons, we say there is more stability on their side of the house, there are more rights. On our side, we are proud to propose the motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your speech. Now please welcome the leader of the opposition. Here.
This is an excellent motion and we intend to do it justice. We will accept the realistic counterfactual, i.e. we are happy to defend the fact that we support the fact that the coup failed, even though we probably regret it happened in the first place. But we also want to talk about the real world and the structure of the Turkish army, the structure of the Turkish state, the structure of the AKP, and what are the likely things to happen in the future. So let's go into the army first. Note, in 2005, Erdogan removed the chiefs of staff of the army, and that's not an accident. That's why the coup attempt was led by low-level army officers, because most of the top-up are already under the control of the AKP. We tell you there is likely that those units that are already dependent on AKP support and funding would be unlikely to support lower-level officers who are already against them and would be likely to want to oust them rather than cooperate with them, which means you would get a large degree of protracted insurgency. Now, admittedly, they claim cities are more secular, but this is a game of numbers. And yes, probably most of the support for the AKP is in the rural countryside. However, the AKP gets almost 50% of the total votes. Combine 1,000 villages, and you probably have more than the population of Istanbul. More importantly, a lot of those areas are in rural Anatolia, which are very easy to defend for guerrilla groups. So there is a likelihood of a protracted insurgency. Do some people feel alienated by the AKP and the status quo? Yes, of course they do. However, there is at least a degree of democratic representation that does not exist under the counterfactual. Liberal groups and the Kurds can unify into parties like the HDP, which admittedly are heavily persecuted, but are at least possible to get into parliament, contrasting with a scenario where a bunch of generals, well not generals in this case, more likely lieutenants, at the top make decisions for them. People are far more likely to feel alienated on their side of the house, contrasted with ours. Then they tell us, but the AKP isn't a true representative of the population because they're just fed propaganda. It is unclear to us why the Turkish army that's brought it up in military school, stationed in bases, would be more likely to know what the preferences of the average Turkish citizen are, contrasted to the AKP, which at least claims its legitimacy from the overall population and the overall vote. But then they tell us the army will be more dependent on the West. But I don't see what the implications of this are for Turkey. There are plenty of countries that are dependent on the West, but the West oddly turns a blind eye to gross human rights violations, be that a semi-dictator in a country just west of here, or more perniciously, individuals like Al-Sisi in Egypt, who can commit extrajudicial killings, mass imprisonment. But because he offers a degree of stability, which is what ultimately the international community care about, you get a blind eye turn to those things, so we don't see why it would be necessarily better to have less human rights violations. But they can't just get away with the fact that the coup will be successful. We claim there will be protracted instability. 5 reasons for this. The first one I've already pointed out, which is the army is not homogeneous. And more importantly, it is also geographically distinct, which means most of the support for Republican secular elites is on the seaside, places like Izmir, places like Istanbul. Well, that's why the biggest opposition to the coup was in places like Ankara, and you're likely to have regional split of people, or you're likely to have insurgencies in places like Anatolia. Note especially that this is different contrasted to Thailand, where you have the Shinawatra government for 1 or 2 years. You have 15 years of AKP rule in Turkey. That means they have a sufficient amount of time to put their own cadres in the army. Secondly, we tell you on this, there is a large regional divide between the rural and urban parts. As opening government pointed out, that is a crucial divide for the country. Thirdly, we tell you that there is a large faith aspect divide. The army was consistently seen as a defender of secularism. Note, for better or for worse, a lot of the Turkish population today care about Islamic values. We at Opening Up don't think that is necessarily incompatible with democracy. The army often press down on religious institutions. They control imams. They ban the right of people to express their religion through things like wearing the veil. That's something people care about, regardless of what Opening Gun thinks about it. That's something that people are likely to rise up in opposition against once you have a military coup. So things like religious militias are probably likely to happen. And note that even individuals like Erdogan ask people to go out in the street and protest the army. Even if he was removed, there would probably be a lot of other AKP leaders or religious leaders who would also call upon their flock to go out on the streets, protest against the army, go into the hills. Fourthly, what about the Kurds? Now, both the army and the government can be equally prosecutorial, but the Kurds in Turkey mostly care about the formation of an old state. Any degree of instability is likely to be used by the PKK in order to create regional factions which would create an insurgency against the government. The same thing the Kurds did in Iraq during the Iraq-Iran war of the 80s. They would use the opportunity, which means you get more opportunities for regional instability. Fifthly, we tell you, there are 3 million Syrian refugees going into Turkey every year. There is these even bigger likelihood of instability in those regions where it is uncertain who is in government. Closing.
Just to clarify, do you think Erdogan's government is good or is it bad and just should be replaced in another way?
I think it's definitely far from ideal. It is certainly better than the counterfactual of a military government. What are issues with military governments? Firstly, it is unlikely to give up power because of risk that they will be removed or prosecuted for what they did in the coup. Secondly, though, military coups harm long-term democratization. Note, panel, the reason why the AKP is so authoritarian and was so careful to remove the chiefs of staff is precisely because of this reason, to decrease the risk of a likely coup in the future. So no matter when in the future the army decides to cede power to democratic institutions, any other political party that gets democratically elected has an incentive to be authoritarian, to control of democratic structures, for fear that the army will create a coup again. So any long-term odds for democratization in Turkey is removed by this. The army does not solve the problem panel. The army is the cause of the problem. They remove long-term odds for democratization. Lastly, just the very fact that you would likely have instability, the fact that the army is unelected means you have a decrease of foreign investors in Turkey. You're less likely to get things like investment, which in the end create the middle class, which help push through the social force that is necessary for democratization. That's why Turkey went through decades of recession. When you have coup after coup, that's why you have some degree of improvement under the AKP. In the end, it's clear that the AKP is far from perfect, but there is no reason why the army would make the situation any better. Incredibly hard to be in opposition.
Thank you very much for your speech. Now please welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. Here you go.
To the end of the speech, says the following. The government now have a clear incentive to act against the army because they're going to fear another coup. Guess what? This is, I think, is symmetric to both sides of the house because the damage is already done. They're already going to be fearful that something like that is going to happen again. Therefore, they're already going to be fearful and have a clear blank check from the population in order to do exactly the same. Note, this logic applies, and yet the failure of seamlessly applies to the vast majority of the speeches we just heard. Refugees and their issues and instability are likely to occur on both sides of the house. Investments are likely to be harmed on both sides of the house. As he says in the beginning of the speech, what he should actually consider as judges to this debate is what is going to, as he says, is a game of numbers. Where is it going to be worse? This is exactly what they're going to do in my speech. There are a couple of points of the battle before entering into critical comparatives. What the speech is going to be in engagement. Note, instability and regional split, there actually can be good things. You know, maybe two Turkeys eventually are not going to be that bad. Secular Turkey or religious Turkey, maybe you should get a name specifically towards that, even if you're going to have an autonomy of another Turkey in some places. It may even lead to an independent Kurdistan. Secondly, instability and less foreign direct investments are the opposite logic. This is why people feel more comfortable investing in Egypt under the assistance regime because it's usually more stability. It's completely dependent on whether you have more stability in order to move that. This is at best a derivative. Regarding the AKP and asymmetric powers that note, currently what is happening is the AKP have a clear incentive to be moderate even after a coup. Why? Because they're a democratic party that can eventually regain power via getting elected again later on in the elections that are going to happen eventually. The army does not have these incentives. As an army general, I'm going to be fearful that someone is going to prosecute me and kill me, and I have weapons to fulfill a counteraction. As a political leader, I do not have these incentives because eventually I can regain my power, these other members of my party can regain my power. Then he says, but the army is not completely homogeneous. We agree that the army is not completely homogeneous, but let's analyze the structures of the army more deeply. It is correct that sometimes Erdogan was able to remove chiefs of state. However, he was not able to remove the entire generals, and more specifically, he was not able to remove the foot soldiers and the middle class soldiers. Why? NATO doesn't allow it. Simply that the incentives of NATO do not allow him to replace the entire army because it needs to be a functional army, and you cannot replace everyone during the course of 15 years. It takes a lot of time to train them. Secondly, the people that actually know how to operate heavy machinery is a long course of training, and if you replace them with people who are not professional, even though they are quote-unquote under the army, they do not know how to operate jet planes and tanks, which can cause a lot more harms because people who actually control these having access to weapons that can make more of a damage, and these people are going to be more fighted under their side of the house. Moreover, soldiers do not have most of the time incentive to fight one against the other because the army, the way the foot soldiers themselves are trained, is a way of cohesion, the moments of the army, the way that you work with one another, the fact that you have shared experiences with other factions, the fact that you now have a common enemy within Turkey because the army is used in order to restrain ISIS. All of them show you that there is narratives that are likely to work together. Obviously, some factions are likely to resist, however, these are not the factions that we most care about. Moreover, it's correct that after 15 years of Erdogan, however, there is 80 years of a tradition of secularism, of Atatürk in Turkey. It takes more time to replace specifically that, and the army is quite an effective brainwashing machine. Trust me, I know it via my personal experiences. Note, so here are the comparatives because we accept that the army is going to be actually, people are going to feel more prosecuted and people that have access to weapons are going to feel more prosecuted under our side. Why? Because the officers that have failed, because Erdogan has a blank check to pursue everyone in these populations, are going to feel threatened for their lives. He already arrested 3,000 soldiers right now, and he said that he wants to have more of them. If you're talking about militias, if I now know how to have a jet plane and I control a military bases that have jet planes and tanks and have access to bazookas and weapons and automated firearms, and there are more people of me, there is just a greater likelihood that there will be more militias under our side of the house, therefore more of an instability. So every point that Syria makes about instability and white men is actually worsened under their side of the house. Moreover, I said in the battle, no, politicians are going to be less likely to make it as enthusiastic to retaliate as an army because this is not the ethos of the AKP. The entire idea is that we should be democratic. Democratic presidents usually don't use the army in order to bash other army factions within the country itself. Moreover, there is a clear way to decentralize just with heavy weaponry under our side. Moreover, now Erdogan has more of a capacity to even radicalize what he does to minorities and the opposition. How come? A, he needs to make a counter-response in order to not look weak in front of his own citizens after a failed coup. Two, note, he is going to have more of a cooperation with the West, right? Because the West has incentives in Turkey as well, and because Erdogan has succeeded to maintain his governorship, it's likely that places are going to just give him more of a leeway to act. This is even more correct for countries as Russia and China that are fearful for their own regimes that are just going to say, do whatever you want within the country. The population themselves are going to have more of an appetite for a counter-response which is going to be passed against the opposition, right? Because it's easy to label everyone as a traitor and there's blank check to call everyone and use those forces against them. What is likely to be used for? To weaken the judiciary, to weaken the opposition, to encourage his rule as presidents, to weaken the army as itself. How can we do it before they want to kill? Why? Open yesterday.
So what is likely to create more instability? A protracted insurgency and a possible civil war, or several thousand people being arrested?
We disagree that it's going to be a likely prolonged civil war, or it's going to be worse under your side. Why? Because more people with more heavy weaponry are actually going to feel more threatened under our side of the house. This is the comparative in this debate. How is it likely to use this blame check? To actually higher the threshold of oppositions entering into parliament, to call everyone a traitor and to limit media access for a lot of people because of a fear of a new coup. To throw out rule and to limit finances of other money flowing into Turkey for people that he's going to feel as threatening his own regime. These things are going to be in red. Why? Because a lot of the security in Turkey and a lot of the restraint in Turkey is a result of Erdogan feeling the army to do something in the future, right? He was fearful to prosecute secularism, to prosecute judges, to prosecute the newspapers because he knew that there is a way that the army can over-oust him. If he has the capacity to weaken the army, then a blanket check in order to revolutionize the system, now the bazooka that the army holds before him and say, if you're going to do something really bad, we're going to do something against you, is completely weakened. Therefore, he has more leeway and less of an opposition to fulfill specifically that. We have analyzed in the first speech why Erdogan rule is really bad, why secularism is something which provides more rights. Now Erdogan has more of a capacity to even radicalize specifically these policies. More instability under our side, under their side of the house, and more pressure to Erdogan to have crazy policies under theirs. We beg you to do this.
Thank you very much for that speech. Now please welcome the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Thank you.
Two questions in this speech. Firstly, is this coup likely to be the velvet glove palace coup with no blood spilt that the opening government would have you believe? Secondly, even if this coup is entirely successful and does entirely pacify Turkey, why the resulting military and post-military administration would be worse. So to the first. Their claim, the first words out of the mouth of Ayal was the army would unite. This was pure wishful thinking. This is not like the Morsi administration, which had 2 years of weak government. This is not like the Shinawatra administration, which also had 2 years. This is after 15 years of continuous rule, of replacing the entire office of corps of the military, of changing the people who run the military training schools, of changing the people who run the military engineering academy, of changing literally every military institution under the control of a party with over 60% of the vote for 12 of those 15 years. It is naive at best to assume that after that protracted process of infiltration, the military will just keel over and resume to the Kemalist notions put forward by Ataturk 90 years ago. Let's be very clear in this debate. They say the average people within the military will, in all cases, support the coup and support democracy. But that misses the ambiguity of this situation. Firstly, the side that has democracy on their side is not clear-cut. Because guess what, guys? The AKP won over 50% of the vote in the last election 2 years ago. So it's absurd to claim that people in the army will just see the military side as the democratic one when they are overthrowing an overwhelmingly democratically elected government. Secondly, their senior officers are in large numbers of cases appointed by the AKP. That means, even if they find this democratic question ambiguous, on one side they're being insubordinate, on the other side they are not. Finally, it's worth noting that military propaganda has been largely controlled by the propaganda department of the AKP. So people on the ground, going through military school, getting mentored by their first officers, have been told that the AKP is the democratically elected government of Turkey and that they owe their loyalty to the Turkish people and the government they have put in place. I am not saying that every single person in the military will keel over. What I am saying is there will be a conflict of loyalties that will mean that a large number of troops and a large number of units will side with the AKP. Hint, that division is what's called a civil war. Why is this civil war likely to last a very long time? Firstly, because of the huge regional divide in Turkey. The important thing to note is that this allows military group units that are supporting AKP to regroup to rural areas, to get supplies, and once they're being attacked, to retreat to a safe zone where the majority of civilians support them. That is exactly what is required for a protracted civil war, where you can't win a quick victory in urban warfare because your opponent can go back, retreat, regroup, and come forward. That's why the war in Afghanistan lasted over a decade. Secondly, because of the huge mobilization of people on the ground through the mechanism of religion. Religion remembers the oppression of the military Kemalist regime, remembers the ban on the bed, remembers the fact that every sermon in the mosque had to go through the military propaganda department to say whether or not it was kosher in the eyes of the general. They remember that. So when they see a military coup throwing over an Islamist government, when the military leaders have been outspoken in criticizing the Islamism of that government, we think they will feel under attack. This means two things. Firstly, it means they will give support, it means they will give food, it means they will give shelter to the people who are fighting, allowing them to regroup and come back and make this protracted civil war last a long time. But secondly, and perhaps even worse, it allows for insurgency. It catalyzes groups like Al-Nusra and IS to start attacking Ankara and Istanbul. Crucially, as we learned in round 5, that is in many cases the stimulus for further repressive measures like state of emergency and martial law at the hands of the military regime. Finally, they said, guys, the military and the PKK are coup. Wrong. Who's been the people shooting at the PKK? Who are the people who arrested Abdullah Öcalan, the leader of the PKK, in the first place? Who are the people pushing Tayyip to constantly restrict the rights to Kurdish language? Hint, it was the Kemalist army who believed in unifying Turkey, not Kurdistan. So, why comparatively do we win? Because on their side they get a slow and grinding repression. They get a repression based on stimulus and response. Every time someone threatens democracy, every time someone threatens Tayyip, he increases repression. On our side, we have a continuous civil war, continuous martial law, continuous battle lines being drawn up on the outsides of cities as troops come in from their rural strongholds in support of the democratically elected government. That is a recipe, not for occasional stimulus, allowing arrest of another 1,000 judges or 3,000 officers, but rather constant stimulus, allowing for a constant martial law and military regime. That is the comparative in this debate. And even if you don't believe that, bluntly, rocket fire kills more people than the occasional arrest. Opening.
A division of loyalties within the army happens on both sides of the house, which means most of Michael's analysis is symmetric. However, we analyze why AKP has less of an incentive to start that civil war and less
it's not symmetric because on your side the coup failed. On your side, those people who were fighting this coup went to jail. Their leaders were arrested, they were suppressed. The premise of your case is Tayyip is bad because as a result of this, he can monopolize power. So yes, some people in the army are going to hate Tayyip for that. But ultimately, the premise of your case, and the reason you're so concerned about the repression, is that he can ultimately subdue that, right? So yes, the hatred is asymmetric, but the point is the action on that hatred is not. Because on the one hand, you have a civil war, on the other hand, you have a coup that's being put down. And finally, they say, and I love this, the AKP won't team up with the military because they hate each other. No, because the military, or factions of the military that we are talking about, are in support of the democracy that elected the AKP. That is exactly the incentive structure the AKP needs to team up with the military. So, why will the regime be worse even if it becomes democratic? They said Erdogan feels like he has a blank check because he feels he's counterbalanced by the army. That's true, and it's true on both sides to some extent. On your side, however, the army beats Erdogan. They're successful in a coup. So if this civil war doesn't happen, they feel there is no opposition whatsoever. So that problem is entirely symmetric, guys. Each faction counterbalances the other. By eradicating one, you don't solve the problem. But look, we told you why a military regime would in the long run be better than their one. And the ultimate reason is even if the military regime lets go of power, which is unlikely in the middle of a civil war and a protracted insurgency, as we saw in Thailand, for instance, where they still maintain power just because a bunch of guys in yellow shirts are just from Bangkok, and that's what's going to happen when troops are coming in to Ankara. But let's think for a second. That democratic regime, and the reason democratic regimes in Turkey always fail, the reason there have been falls in the last 80 years, is because people are afraid of military repression, so they try to centralise power. On their side of the house, they're afraid that there was an unsuccessful coup. On their side of the house, they're afraid that there was a successful coup that was capable of removing the government from power. On which side are you likely to be more repressive? When the military are unable to remove you from power, or when you are a government brought into place after the military deposed the last government, so you know they're able to pull governments away. That's the time when you're the most repressive, when you most try to centralise power, because in that scenario, the perceived risk posed by the military is the greatest, so you try to bulwark that via the greatest centralisation. You know what the irony is? This is a personal regime. This is a regime based on one man who can't even keep a prime minister for more than 6 months. This was a regime that was gradually, due to the decline of economic growth, on the way out. They, on their side of the house, replace it with civil war and despotism, proud to stand in opposition.
Thank you very much to the first half, and now please welcome the member of government. Here.
Everyone ready? We hear a lot from the opening opposition that this would not work. We would not have stability in the long run. You know what? This is not the criteria in this debate. Because we think that if there is legitimacy to a coup, if the goal is right, there would be instability in both sides of the house. The only question is it worth fighting for, and should we have won? The French Revolution, to remind you, ended with people starving because they burned the fields, ended with war, ended with Napoleon, but we still think it's good because eventually it brought us liberalism, and it brought us the values that we think are important. We think that if we look at society as a whole, it's much more important than the economy right now, or maybe how many people would die on each side, because this is something long-lasting. This is something for the next generations of people living in Turkey. And would they have rights? Would they have a life that they think is decent? If we were to think that the only criteria is survival, then we wouldn't really care about the entity of Turkey. We wouldn't really care about the constitution. We would just say that Erdogan is good, right? Because people live, people have better lives. We don't say that this is good, and they agree with us that he should be changed. Meaning, the two questions in this debate is, should we bring about the change in terms of values, or should we respect the so-called democracy and the want of the people? opposition. It means that it actually has the ability to stop other factions from fighting it, to block the media, and so on. So they cannot say that it won't work. But even on terms of the historical memory, we say that in a liberal society, eventually, even religious people are fine with that, like they have been in the past. Why? Because it allows them to be religious, but also for secular people to be secular. So they would be happy with the outcome. They don't necessarily need that. And secondly, they are forgetting that most of the Turkish people at this point, maybe in the future, no, not the children, but they still grew up on Ataturk. They still grew up on the fact that Turkey should be liberal, should be secular. And most of the people do support that idea at least. So they won't be against what the military represents. Now this leads me to my positive, because the Turkish army doesn't only defend the borders, it has a specific role. It is the defender of the eternal secularity clause in the constitution. It has done so constantly. That's why all the previous coups were legitimized by the people. Now we think that what Erdogan is trying to do, he's trying to change the rules in order to eventually change the constitution. But what he's doing right now is unconstitutional. He's going against the separation of authorities. He's going against freedom of speech. He's going against journalism and so on. Now notice here that this is already a legitimate enough of a reason to take him down, because we think that the constitution has a higher status than just any other law. Why? Because it represents the spirit of the people that is above them. That's why it's much harder to change that. And we say that this is the thing that ensures that even minorities get what they want. Because if that weren't the case, then democracy would just be about whatever most people want. But we say that sometimes what most people want is oppressive enough to others that we say that if we compare many people but to the damage done to one, we say that certain damage, like taking away your rights, could be much more detrimental than maybe a bit more happiness to the majority deciding now to oppress. So we think that we should go for the side that wants to protect the constitution. And the military said that. It was even in the context slide. Moreover than that, they have the political backing of Fethullah Gulen, which does that in his schools, in his teaching. That's what he promotes. So he even has a political backing. And there is Ataturk's party. So we think that there is enough of a backbone to actually create a new regime that would be, according to the constitution, that would be secular, that would be good. And if it wouldn't be legitimized by the own people that can agree at least on that. So we say that because of that, we think that this trumps over. Before I go on to my second point.
The army had 4 coups in the last 50 years with the goal of spreading democracy. The best leader it created was Recep Tayyip Erdogan. There is an incentive to centralize power. How many more coups are needed to change that?
It didn't create Erdogan. Erdogan rose to power because enough time has passed and people forgot, and also he had the opportunity to actually climb slowly. He didn't say, I'm a dictator. He did that breaking the laws in the salami method. We say that we are going against it. So we don't think that there would be a new Erdogan, and if there would be, we are for another coup. We are okay with that. Now, why do we think that there wouldn't have been another way? Because they try to tell us, oh, there could be a new party, we can go through parliament. Wrong. Notice that the closest attempt we had to this was the new Kurdish party that in a magical way came over the 10% threshold, which is unbelievably high. And even then, there was a new election, meaning that Erdogan was able to scheme once again his opposition out of the equation, and he does even more to ensure that they won't be re-elected again. But worse than that, we say that in a world in which the coup has failed, people have less of an incentive to go and try to change even through the political system. Now here, this doesn't only go against because of the state of emergency. This goes because people see that there is no hope. People see that even the people with the guns were not.
I prefer to read The Guardian to foreign policy, so I would like to explain how we are going to achieve long-term stability by changing what democracy means to the people and engaging a more system in order to be able to justify their needs and to make their society work. First of all, we believe that criteria should not be how military would react. You have a lot of factors, it is not really predictable, and therefore both cases on the opening bench is something that is not really, that could go important because everyone could see that it brings more of freedoms, more of human rights, more of representation, and all of the other teams try to achieve that. First of all, 2 points about it. First is whether the Erdogan is going to be first. First of all, we believe that this is not quite comparative. Maybe a short run, maybe not. But what is important is that now Erdogan knows that he has internal power struggle, meaning that he needs to rely on external powers, and since he is ally with West and part of the NATO, we are going to have more of a bargaining chip in order to control him, because he cannot rely on the military anymore or his internal powers. We believe that he is not going to be as crazy, or even if he was, it's going to be good because of my extension I will going to provide. Moreover than that, Monica says that people support what military represent. It is really problematic. You need to have a bit of phrasing. People went on the streets by thousands to fight military force with tanks and guns because they didn't believe that their democracy attempt was good enough or valuable enough for them to actually oppose their government they voted for. Meaning that they do not really adore military, but what is really important, they connect democracy to military forces and violence, and this is why we cannot achieve democracy in Turkey. My extension. First of all, why is this not going to provide efficient or long-lasting democracy? First of all, we believe that the military is not a good agent of trying to impose any kind of democratic change. Why? First of all, because the perception, you perceive that democracy is something that is happening only through groups, meaning that you can only achieve democracy by violent means, and it is only going to be enforced by neglecting your voting results you had previously. Moreover than that, we believe that military is not legitimate. Why? Because first of all, nobody voted for them. They do not have any connection to the people who are living under their society. In the following years, they are going to establish their governments. Moreover than that, we believe that there are some unique problems with military. You have gender misrepresentation. You have things that are uniquely there within their honor codes, and those things are not the representation of what every citizen or general public feels, and we do not have any kind of mechanism to express our dissatisfaction, meaning that when democracy comes through the military, you perceive it as something that is not yours, something that you do not want but is imposed. Why is this really problematic? Because first of all, you corrupt the idea of democracy. Why is that? First of all, you tie it with violence, fear, with grief, with instability. When these kind of things happen, somebody gets hurt, somebody gets killed, you lose your job, you cannot go to work, your life actually changes drastically, you panic, you do not feel safe in your society. This is something that you connect to anytime you try to make democratic change through these things. Why is this really important? Because you tie this kind of values of democracy to secularism that brings human rights, that brings freedoms and democracy. And what is the impact of this? Impact is that you feel that you need to protect your identity of a Turkish person who supports Erdogan or is more conservative or does not support coup against the democratic perception or the identity that is going to be to impose to you. Why is this really important? Because first of all, you're going to receive backlash from religion. Opening government says, why is this worse than the secular backlash? Because people who are religious are usually A, more conservative in these areas, B, more prone to actually be under the influence of extreme rhetorics that comes from the south of Turkey, ISIS, whatever, meaning that you create more of the severe polarization, more of the people who are less likely to include themselves in the society. Why is this problematic? Because when you feel that you need to defend your identity, you antagonize all the others. If you believe that being secular Turkish is something that is going to be imposed to you, you're going to provide more of the exclusion for anything that is not your identity. But what's really important is that any kind of democratic idea or discussion in the future is going to be corrupt. Why? Because you now perceive people as traitors. If they try to discuss whether democracy should be imposed, they are the part of the military that actually enforced something, and nobody from the government ever proved that we have enough of a support of a love for military in order for this to pass just like that. And this is really important for the future. Why? First of all, we believe that there are two groups of people. People who support this kind of group, people who disagree. This is problematic even for those people, because they're going to rely on army to change anything in the future every time something that is not good or working in their society. That means less people participating in political system, less people trying to engage in discussion, less people going to NGOs or trying to make opposition. This is problematic because with these liberal democratic ways, you can actually try to see what your opposition should look like and what democracy you can actually influence democracy you live in. But what's really problematic that there are people who are against this. And these people, and we believe this is the majority of the people because what we see and because it failed, because of the people who went to the street that actually disagree with this, these people are going to give more legitimacy to next president to change constitution and to enrich power and rights more easily. Why? Because now they see that it will be something that may happen. So they are more willing to give absolute power to the next president, who is going to be even worse because he is going to feel threatened and going to feel that he is going to be overthrown. For all of these reasons, we can clearly show you that this is something that does not lead to long stability. Please vote for the opposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. Now please welcome the government whip. Here you go.
Honorable panel, on closing government, we come and tell you that democracy is not for anything if it does not include the rights it's supposed to give people. We come and tell you that in Turkey today, you do not have proper democracy. What you have is elections. Elections does not equal democracy, not real democracy. That's why we're standing here and we're saying it's a darn shame that this revolution has failed, this coup has failed, because it was our only chance, only way of trying to achieve proper democracy here. Several points to get what we heard from the previous speaker. Notice, on one hand, she comes and tells us, well, the people will not support because the people are not liberal, they will not support the liberal change. On the other hand, she says, well, the people will, so let's be clear, if this is true, the people will not support the liberal change, okay, and that's why the coup is going to fail and does not support the army, that also means that you cannot really change democracy in any way, because this also means that people will not go out and protest. This also means that people will not go out and demand their rights or vote for another party. So you fail on that. But if she says that the people will support liberal change, it means they will support the army, because that's exactly what the army represents, particularly in Turkey. Because this whole case that we got from the closing opposition telling us that, well, there's a problem with teaching the people that democracy is somehow tied up to the army and to the bloodshed. Several things. A, it's in the Turkey constitution, particularly in Turkey. This is the base of their, this is the thing that's stated there, and the army is the one that's protected the constitution so far, has protected democracy so far in Turkey. So you don't get this like added damage, which we're not actually sure what the damage is on their side of the house. Moreover, she fails to engage with our analysis on why you do not have any other way to promote this change that we are talking about. She comes and claims, no, that the army is perceived as not mine, as a citizen, as a common people. False, again, because the army is composed of people from all layers of society in Turkey. The ones in the villages, the ones in the cities, the rich, the poor, they're all in the same army. So we are saying that if you are afraid that for somehow the people will now suddenly start tying up democracy with bad things like bloodshed or oppression, guess what? Status quo. That's exactly what Erdogan is doing. That's exactly what we're trying to fight on our side of the house. The fact that in today's when she comes, when both oppositions come at us, we have bloodshed, people have died, people have been fired, and all that. We are
Love.
We tell you, it doesn't matter at the point at which he commits acts that are undemocratic by definition. We're saying the Constitution is the thing that comes to protect minorities, it comes to protect the rights of everyone. And here we're saying that because of this, we need to make sure, we need to have someone to protect it. We need to make sure we promote these ideas. How can we do it? Why do we not have any other way? We have seen that even in elections, even at the point at which Erdogan, like a party manages to pass the threshold, somehow Erdogan calls for a new election, okay? Meaning you need something radical to change the system to improve that. I am not sure how opening can disagree.
Even if civil war is on both sides, on yours, the rebels represent the democratic majority and have a rural Islamized safe haven from which to regroup and retrench. On ours, they just have the support of a minority faction of the army. On which side is that civil war worse?
No, Michael, no, disagree. Look, let's look at all these things about extremists and how religious will feel. The fact that we are supporting a secular regime does not mean necessarily oppression of religion. Because when we are saying when there is also oppression of religion, we're saying the meaning of it in Turkey is this not changing the rule. It's not a violent oppression because the rules there are all already secular. We're not banning people to believe. Actually, we're giving them more freedom to believe in whatever they want them to have and do it in a better political system. But we can't tell that the point at which this coup has failed. And this is exactly when now you have a problem that is a fear of trying again, that is losing faith in the system. If you want to compare democracy with the way it was before the coup or the way it is after the coup has failed, the democracy after the coup has failed is so much worse because now people do not believe that they can change. Now people have lost faith in the system. Now people are afraid from themselves and from the way that our basic human values have decreased, and we have lost a sense of humanity. That is why we come and tell you, hey, the moment that they agree with us that the Erdogan regime was not a good regime, and we prove to that this is the only way to actually change. This is the only way to secure the basic values that do not exist in democracy today. We win this debate. We're so proud for that.
Thank you very much for that speech, and now please welcome the opposition to speak here.
When you receive a message from your president and you're willing to go outside unarmed and face the military, face people who are trained to actually kill people, when you're willing to go out and fight with them with your bare hands, that is when we believe that you as people actually believe in the system that is good. Maybe we as outsiders do not believe that that is the way someone should live, that is the way that the state should function, but that is not up to us to decide. The main question of this debate today is where we will actually have people with more chances of, at the end, achieving democracy. Now, what the second government does not do is that they do not respond to our analysis why military is not a legitimate actor in this situation, and also they never provide us with reasons why, at the end of the day, this is going to be better for those people. What you have from our side is majority of the population actually not believing in military. So you have majority of the population seeing that this is not something that they have chosen, literally actively fighting against it, with their bare hands. So basically you have people who don't are the ones who are going to create the democracy that we so really want to have. So people who are supposed to be the mechanism of that democracy. Because at the end of the day, no matter how good institutions you have, no matter how great politicians you have, if the people in your society are not ready to fight for their rights, are not ready to control their institutions, are not ready to think about the rights of other people, and we have shown you why they're actually going to hate those other people even more at the end. So if you have people who actually form the state, who are in this mindset, you can never actually have the democracy that you want. But the status quo is that on both sides this government to be overruled. But not only this. The possible reason that a lot of people were not actually involved on the side of the military was because they were kind of expecting the coup to work. Why? Because that is how like all the previous presidents were actually overthrown. So basically, we have this culture, like people being like, okay, no, military is going to take care of it. What we see as on our side, when this has failed, people still have the option of going out to the streets and like disassembling the government, and it is quite possible. But you might know that it has happened in Serbia. It's not only the military has given the means of killing the spoiled government. Actually, people were out on the streets. People were demanding for the government to be lynched, and that is what happened with that government. So at the end of the day, people have power. So before no, I did it. Okay. So, like, two main things here. First, what happens when you link democracy to violence, as we have already, also explained? You see it as something that is inherently bad. Now, know that the coup that happened is not quite transparent. You don't know who organized. You have, like, okay, military organized. You have this whole space for a lot of people speculating. So, the only thing you see, as you explained, is that your everyday life is changing. You have people who are infringing your political life, who are infringing your safety, who are out in the streets, who are actually disrupting the system that you like, that you voted for. No matter if it's good or bad, that is the system that you chose to live in. You have people who are making it difficult for you to live in the system that you chose. Now, you see those people as enemies. Now, those people are the people who are linking everything they do, every step that they do with democracy. So basically, you see people who are killing your life quality is people who want to bring you democracy, to impose democracy on you. So not to give you the chance of choosing the democracy that you like, choosing the way of the state that functions that you like and that you want to live in, no, but by making you do it. Now, what do you do that as Vida explained? You then tend to generalize all the identities that you usually perceive as enemies. Why do they want to give us democracy? Because we do not take care of minorities as much as we should. So basically, it's minorities' fault. Why do they want to do it? Because we don't have, I don't know, institutions as West. So West is the one whose fault it is. So basically, at the end, you have people who tend to put all their hatred towards everything that is completely different to them. So as Mina said, you have this really difficult polarization. No. Whatever happens at the end of the day, whichever next president comes, he is going to have to deal with this kind of situation. So now he has the whole nation polarized, the whole nation, not the whole nation, but the majority of the nation. It's not like that, but you remember that there was death, you remember that there was injury, you remember that you suffered because of someone, and then at that moment, you're not a rational human being who just goes, oh, they killed few of us, but it's okay because, hey, look, they're really an awesome government. No, they're the ones who overruled you, who overruled your state, your government, the government that you have chosen. And the current situation is that these people are the majority. At the moment when they become like, when there is more people who want to change, we are like more than willing to embrace the fall of the system and everything. But the important thing to take away from this debate is that people are the ones who are supposed to actually create the whole system and to antagonize it, and to control it later. So at the end of the day, because all that we say does not matter at all if we do not have like the platform of actually actors who are going to implement all of the nice things that we want for people and for the system they want to live in. Because at the end of the day, no matter how bad the situation is, it still has more perspective from our side of the house we honestly beg you to oppose.